Welcome to the Daily Dispatch. For today's news, we start with covering the escalations in the Russia-Ukraine war, with missile strikes being conducted from both sides. Then we take you to Montreal, where scientists, climate advocates, and officials from all around the world will come together to tackle the loss of biodiversity and hopefully put us one step closer to saving our planet. We'll also be spotlighting the global energy crisis as we break down the impacts of G7 and Europe placing a price cap on the Russian oil. And to round up the headlines for the day, we're looking at a crisis in Congo, where a rebel group and the government are caught in a deadly standoff. We're here to give you the news and to help you infer the world around you. I'm Tayyaba Nasar Khan, and here is your Daily Dispatch. For our first dispatch of the day, we're spotlighting the escalations in the Russia-Ukraine war. Attacks took place at two Russian military bases. Confirming the attacks, the Russian defense minister claimed military drones carried out a massive attack at two bases, resulting in the loss of 3 soldiers and 2 aircrafts. It is reported drones targeted Russia's 121st Heavy Bomber Aviation Regiment, which holds strategic bomber squadrons, while Ukraine says Russia has fired a wave of missiles in different parts of Kyiv, plunging large parts of the region into darkness. Kyiv alleges civilian infrastructure was targeted, a claim Russia denies, saying it targeted military command and communication systems. These attacks are signs of a major escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war. It is the first time Ukraine has attacked military targets with drones this deep inside Russia, just 150 miles from Moscow. Moscow has in turn increased its missile attacks targeting the capital of Ukraine, Kyiv. The war in Ukraine has already disrupted the food supply and energy lines, creating fears of food insecurity, especially in the countries that heavily rely on agricultural import. Russia and Ukraine export 12% of the world's agriculture. This war has also caused oil prices to rise. For the first time since 2014, a barrel of crude oil crossed over $100. Disruption in energy and food supplies means higher prices for commodities and more inflation, hitting the most vulnerable regions and people already reeling from the climate change disasters and weak economies. As a result of these disruptions, according to the UNDP report, 70 million people have fallen into poverty in just 3 months. It is quite clear that if the war continues to escalate, it will increase the suffering of the people, delay the full global recovery from COVID-19 economic slowdown, and further increase the challenges of the vulnerable regions in the global south. Unfortunately, there does not seem to be any end in sight. Next up, let's jump over to climate change and the conference looking to combat it. COP15, also known as the UN Conference on Biological Diversity, is taking place tomorrow in Montreal, Canada. But wait, didn't we just have COP27? Don't worry, you're not the only one who may be confused. While COP27 focused on climate change, COP15 is the 15th iteration in a series of meetings established by the Convention on Biological Diversity. And this year's meeting is significant because the COP27 held in Glasgow last year linked biodiversity with climate change at the international level for the first time. So scientists, climate advocates, and officials from all around the world will gather to discuss and take important decisions on one of the most urgent issues: the damage to nature and loss of biodiversity due to climate change. The targets include reducing pesticide use, protecting at least 30% of sea and land for conservation measures, and generating a $200 billion per year fund to finance the policies to protect biodiversity. As the world's natural landscapes face more fire seasons, oceans warm up, and glaciers melt, natural ecosystems are degrading. A report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says 1 in 10 species is likely to face a very high risk of extinction. Scientists have also warned that up to 90% of coral reef will vanish in the next 3 decades. We're breaking down the 2 biggest challenges countries will face this year at the conference. 1. COP15 will be hoping to secure a strong commitment from the states to take concrete measures to preserve the biodiversity. While this is primarily a logistical and operational challenge, there's more to it. Some experts also suggest any plan or action to preserve the biodiversity should take into consideration the rights of the indigenous people and their sources of income. Previously, there have been precedents in Africa and Asia where conservation of lands led to mass displacements, evictions, and loss of livelihood. The protection of nature and security of human beings are not exclusive. And two, countries are bound to lock horns over who will bear the financial burden of implementing these measures. The Global South is already facing a brunt of climate change effects in the shape of floods, longer summers, and melting glaciers, prompting the calls for the richer states to share the financial burden and lend technical support to the vulnerable regions. The recent Global Shield Fund established at the COP15 held in Egypt is aimed at helping the states affected by the climate change-induced devastations. And that brings us to our next dispatch. Effective from yesterday, the European Union and the G7 countries, along with Australia, have put a price cap on the Russian seaborne oil to reduce Kremlin's ability to finance the Russia-Ukraine war. Capping the price at $60 a barrel, the parties have also claimed the move is aimed at stabilizing the oil market prices. But Russia alleges the move is aimed at crippling its economic capacity and has refused to adhere to this price cap. This decision means the European Union, G7 states, and Australia will allow their tankers to ship Russian oil only if it is sold at or below $60 per barrel in the international market. Let's break down what the impacts of this move are going to be for Russia and the world. 1. Since the world's shipping and insurance firms are predominantly controlled by the G7 states, this move is likely to create challenges for Russia to export its oil. It's important to remember, Russia is one of the biggest producers of oil. In October this year, it produced 9.72 million barrels per day, second only to Saudi Arabia. 2. While this cap does not apply to oil being imported into Europe through the pipelines, seaborne oil does account for almost 2/3 of oil imports coming into the bloc from Russia. With countries like Germany, Poland, and Austria pledging to completely wean off oil imports from Russia by the end of this year, we are likely to continue seeing moves like this price cap being employed as a tactic to pressure Russia while the war with Ukraine continues. And finally, it's already evident from the current trends that Russia will look to counter this move by the European bloc by focusing on its oil export to countries like China, India, and Turkey that are still willing to trade with it, and even employ measures like currency swap arrangements to secure its exports. Some experts even suggest if Russia can secure enough exports to the other countries, it can look towards retaliating against the European bloc by stopping the pipeline oil to landlocked countries in the bloc still heavily dependent on the Russian oil to meet their energy needs. Now let's take you to Africa, where Democratic Republic of Congo is reeling from armed conflict, with the government blaming a rebel group of 270 killings. The government of Democratic Republic of Congo, or DR Congo, has pointed a finger at an armed rebel group, M23, for an attack on a village near the provincial capital, Goma. The Congolese army and government had originally accused M23 and Rwandan Defense Forces of killing 50 people in the village. The M23 chairperson challenged the figure as an overestimation, accusing the government of attempting to divert from the atrocities committed by the Congolese forces. The two parties have both been at odds since 2021, and with the humanitarian crisis looming, the UN peacekeeping missions in Congo has called for an investigation into the accusation, while the UN and EU representatives have likened the killings to war crimes. Eastern Congo has been grappling with violence, as the government and Congolese forces continue to clash with the local militias and armed rebel groups. The origins of the current violence are rooted in the spillover of the Rwandan Hutus, who were guilty of the genocide against Tutsis there, back in 1994. Armed militias created by the Hutus led to reactionary Tutsi armed militias too. M23 is one of the local Congolese Tutsi militias, who flowed into the eastern Congo from neighboring Rwanda during the Tutsi genocide of 1994. The UN representatives have also pointed to Rwanda providing support to the rebel group in Congo, backing the allegation often made by the Congolese government, while Rwanda authorities have tried to dissociate themselves from the rebel group. Vincent Burita, the Rwandan foreign minister, took to Twitter, saying that M23 should not be equated to Rwanda. It is not Rwanda's problem to solve. Meanwhile, Rwanda has had a history of military intervention inside Congo, such as in 1996 and 1998, on the claims of defending itself against the local militias. Rwanda also accuses Congo of using the Hutu militias as a proxy, which Congo vehemently denies. But despite multiple meetings between the leaders of Congo and Rwanda, and an agreement on the ceasefire, fighting still continues. We'll keep tabs on the crisis as we hope for a quick resolution. And finally, let's see if we can round up the rest of the news for you in a single minute. First up, India looks set to continue buying oil from Russia, despite the West pushing for curbing Russian oil exports. External Affairs Minister Subramanian Jaishankar reiterated that the country will prioritize its own energy requirements and will continue to import oil from Russia despite the G7 and European Union's oil price cap on the Russian seaborne oil. The Ukrainian foreign minister had previously voiced his concerns, stating that the opportunity for India to buy Russian oil at a cheap price comes from the fact that Ukrainians are suffering from the Russian aggression and die every day. Also on the dispatch, Facebook's parent company, Meta, has threatened that it will remove news from its platform if the US Congress passes a bill that will make it easier for news companies to come together and negotiate with social media companies like Google and Meta for the compensation for their content. This battle is likely to continue, with social media companies and news outlets at odds over the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act, with companies like Meta stating they refuse to submit to government-mandated negotiations that unfairly disregard any value we provide to the news outlets through increased traffic and subscriptions, and newspapers suggesting local papers cannot afford to endure several more years of big tech's use and abuse, and time to take action is dwindling. If Congress does not act soon, we risk allowing social media to become America's de facto local newspaper. And to round things up, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has filed court papers to challenge the impeachment charges leveled against him, after an independent panel appointed by the National Assembly Speaker found evidence of financial misconduct and violations of the Constitution. The report stated that large sums of foreign money were found hidden at his farm, and that he failed to report its theft to the police after it was stolen in 2020. The scandal has led to a national question on the sources of the billionaire president's wealth. That's all, folks. We'll be back tomorrow with more bite-sized news that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the country, the region, and the globe. I'm Tayyaba Nasar Khan, and this was your Daily Dispatch.